Module 2, feeling your life and the skills of cultivating awareness. So I'm going to ask you the same question 3 times. How are you? How are you feeling? How are you at feeling your feelings? Now, in a way, anytime we say, hey, how are you? We're kind of saying, like, how do you feel? And in order to ask them how they feel, we're kind of saying, well, how are you feeling your feelings right now? Because, how often in modern life do we just suppress our feelings and, chemically make them disappear? So that's a playful way of checking in with that in ourselves. And this introduces us to the idea in Qigong practice and in Chinese medicine practices we call Ganqi, which is something that is very rooted in each of our sense of character. Some of us do this a lot, some of us do this too much, some of us don't do this very well at all. And Ganqi describes your ability to feel your feelings, feel your sensations, feel what's happening around you, empathize with other people, so that we're connecting with each other and ourselves in a way with what's going on right now experientially. So here's another question. Is an intentional pause to check in with yourself more stressful, or is it like bathing in warmth, connection, and self-care? And I think for all of us, that's a really poignant question. I can think of times in my life where I didn't want to check in, I wanted to check out. And that's, I think, a really good place to begin any conversation about healing is, are you ready to check in and to feel your feelings and to get skillful with that, but not paranoid or obsessive or so hypervigilant to our feelings that now are paralyzing ourselves by worrying about what they mean. And that's why these things take time and skill. So Module 2 is going to ask us to learn about embodied self-awareness and self-assessment. And this brings up another context in Qigong practice, especially in Chinese medicine and acupuncture, called De Qi. And that character, we're not going to get into, it actually means, from a long time ago, imagine you're at a market where almost everyone used to get their food all the time, and you're testing a melon or a squash to see if it's ripe. And I think today, because of how we're living, imagine you're checking an avocado to see if it's going to make it home. And I hope you get a sense of that in a playful way, not in a concrete judging way, so that we have a willingness to just sense in and be with what we feel and learn to assess that. Because, we could all say, I'm a little angry, but in what way? And how volatile, how resentful, how based on oppression or based on anxiety or other things like that. So once we can start that ganqi, that perceiving our feelings, now assessing them and where they're really coming from begins to build nuance and a kind of emotional intelligence and a kind of vocabulary. Because if you are engaging in this practice as a person, if you're engaging in this as a clinician, and hopefully if you're engaging in this as a person who isn't a clinician, you can use these skills if you are working with a clinician. This allows us to have some very discerning and potent conversations about what it's like and where and how, so that we're being met on that level of experience instead of story. Story is important, but state has to change before story will soften or shift. Because now the story has, oh, and I can shift my state, instead of I can't stand how I feel. So one difficulty to this, which we'll talk about in the second module, is how our conditioned blind spots, depending on our family, how stoic or how intense our upbringing was. Because if we're not used to being allowed to feel our feelings, then our feelings are often a blind spot. Our reference is, look what I did, instead of, here's how I am. And that's true for a lot of people. So we're going to spend some time in that module learning skills about cultivating awareness, self-awareness, embodied awareness. something we call radical self-acceptance, which is a practice of recognizing what it is to work with ourself. And I'm not going to go into this too far, but I'm putting my hand here for a moment, and I'm inviting everyone, if you're kind of curious and willing to just hold your hand out like this, and then ask yourself, if I'm able to have self-awareness and work on myself, then that implies that in some way I am bigger or vaster than a self. And in the sense of consciousness and spirit and other things, that's true. But I think we nowadays have lost that awareness that we're not just ourself. Ourself is an aspect of being that really has to do with how we interact with people and how we understand how we're doing as a person. So we call this selfing, where we consciously recognize sometimes we are consumed in a way experientially by just dealing with ourself. And then sometimes when we have a practice and patience, sometimes in ceremony, we can allow ourselves, okay, so this seems to be how it's going. Maybe I'll look at other ways to approach this selfing experience. And that gives us a huge sense of relief, because then we're not bound in our self, our story. We're free in our becoming and our selfing. So one of the ways that we're going to become more self-aware is a skill we call the three selves. And this sometimes relates to the three treasures of Chinese medicine, Jing, Qi, and Shen, essence and energy and spirit. Can sometimes relate to your three dantian. If you practice yoga, you could translate that into your 7 chakras in the ways to be aware of self and selfing and becoming. And there's some other aspects of mind and mindfulness that we're going to learn that help us a lot. Now, one other way that's really quite useful in the sense of feeling into our lives and cultivating awareness is a practice that we call the way of enough. And I'm going to use this character, and if you see me do this with other characters, I guess it's my thing. In order to have a real sense of our wholeness, we want to find enough. Now, that can mean a lot of things outwards, but inwardly, we want to have enough sense of our soil, how we take care of our body, our sleep, drinking water, eating really good food, how we take care of the stalk, the growing part, the journey, our path, our goals, our purpose, which, all of those things are sacred in a way. So if we have enough of what we can do to take care of ourselves, the soil of our being, and do enough things to have enough goals and purpose, and not too much, not too little, but just enough, then we know we're moving, grounded, resourced, and, in the direction we want to go. And then there's these little branches and leaves that our ability to receive affection, receive community, receive goodwill, receive things that we might need from other people, even if we feel embarrassed to ask. And depending on your upbringing, and again, those kind of conditioned blocks, this is often the hardest thing for people to do. And I would say that's really a lot more true of men who are probably over 40, because culture up until, recently, men were supposed to be autonomous and individuated and strong and don't need anything. I don't need any help. And I was kind of raised that way in a way. So it takes some practice to learn to wake up our leaves again and to allow ourselves to be nourished by the things that are around us, not just our food. And the last one is over here, which is the flower, which is enough becoming yourself in the world, becoming yourself, expressing yourself, perhaps dancing, perhaps singing, perhaps teaching a class, doing something around performance, being the center of attention in a healthy way, so that when we express ourselves outwardly, then we have enough. Because we have enough of our resourcefulness, our goals and purpose, our connection and receiving, our expression, and allowing ourselves to be, big enough to be seen. Now we have a balanced path to move through in our lives. And the closing circle for Module 2 is called The Four Puberties of Life. And this is one of my favorite things to share. And sometimes I'm asked to teach Aboriginal education, and I know there's probably about 20 or 30 talks that I do, and that's always in the top 4 that people say that was really helpful for me. So I just imagine that, in Western culture, we have one puberty in the middle of high school. Imagine that you have 3 more opportunities in your life to just shift what it is that you're doing with your becoming, what you're doing with your finding enough of the things that you need to be your whole self.